Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this town hall meeting, a continuation of the conversation as we head into a new year, a time to be thinking about future directions, and that is the purpose today, to confer with you about the report on the conversation and about the next steps that lie ahead of us. Before we do begin the work of the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge that even though we're meeting virtually, Queen's University is situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory, and we're grateful to be able to live, to learn, and to play on these lands. It's my understanding that this territory is included in the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. The Kingston Indigenous community continues to reflect the area's Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee roots. There is also a significant Métis community, as well as First Peoples from other nations across Turtle Island present here today. So welcome, everyone. Just a few technical items. These meetings are recorded and this meeting will be posted on my website tomorrow. Recorded so that people who are unable to join us today are able to watch the proceedings and to hear the discussion, and also for me and for my team to take note of issues raised that need to be dealt with or built into our deliberations in the future. I'll be having more of these conversations in the next little while. The next two that are scheduled are on January the 27th and on February the 9th. And I hope you can join me at those, and please encourage your colleagues to attend. The sessions are open to everyone in the Queen's community, students, faculty, staff, and alumni. And they will be broadly incremental in the sense that I'm sure we'll cover some of the same territory in each of these meetings, but the purpose of them will be to move us forward towards a strategic framework for the university. So there you can see the rollout on the screen. We're in a phase now of consulting on what the strategic framework, or the new one for the university, might look like and what it might include. And then the plan is to have the board, which has the authority to approve strategy, to approve a framework for our strategic development at its March meeting. And that will then signal the moment at which some on-campus implementation groups get to work. And those will be the groups looking at some of the strategic goals and details that are raised in the report on the conversation, but also need to be reflected in a more positive way in our strategy for the future. That process will continue through the summer, and the intention is eventually the work of those working groups should be fed up to a steering committee, which would finalize the strategic goals which complement our strategic framework. And then that's the point at which we'll want to think about how that translates into a communication strategy more broadly, in terms of advertising what the university is about, broadcasting more generally our new vision for our future. So that is the process as I anticipated playing out in front of us. I think the important thing about the current moment is that we're between the period of diagnosis, which is what I think of culminating in the report on the conversation, and now this new phase in which we need to take the insights yielded from the conversation and build them into a vision for our future. To decide, obviously the negative things identified in the report on the conversation we will address, but so too are many positive goals which we want to set for ourselves. And the purpose of this phase is to go from conversation to plan and vision for the future for the university. And my hope is that in this session, I'll be able to answer some questions you might have about that process, but more particularly to take your suggestions about ways in which we might think about that strategic framework. I've been doing some work on what I think of as the components of a strategic framework, and obviously there would be things like a mission statement, a vision statement, a declaration of values, and the identification of some strategic goals. And we could turn our attention to the discussion of a mission statement today. I had a conversation about these components with the board last week, and obviously any language we use around our mission and vision right now is hypothetical, it's provisional, because we're only at the beginning of a long period of consultation about what our strategy should look like and how we want to articulate our ambitions for ourselves and the issues which we regard as most important. So that's the direction of things. Now, obviously, coming up with a mission and vision for the university, a new one responsive to our present circumstances and aspirations, is a complex and interesting task, and it involves our deliberations on the very fundamental questions about this institution and its future. But before I get there, this is the first of these town hall meetings to embark on that movement towards a strategic framework. So there may still be questions that colleagues and friends have on the call today that relate to the report on the conversation, and I'd be more than happy to take those. So we have an arrangement that Mary Beth Gauthier will read out questions to me, and I'll do my best to answer them. And so do please put your questions in the chat now, and Mary Beth will let me know when there are some there that I can turn my attention to. If that's okay, Mary Beth, can I leave that with you, and you'll let me know when we have some questions I should be answering?
Certainly. Patrick, we do have a question in the queue.
Oh, good.
So someone is asking that you mentioned in your prior address on November 10th that an impact-oriented university would be one in which collaboration has been raised to a high art. Have you identified any tangible policy directions that might move us in that direction?
What a great question. Yes. It's interesting, a lot of the components of the report, such as this one, I mean, this was obviously a comment I made in an address, but it's implicit there in the original report. There's a lot of work being done already on a number of the components. One of those would be internationalization, and I can talk about that. But this particular question, collaboration, is an area in which I've noticed some very significant steps forward in the last several months. So we now have a number of new initiatives which have sprung up through collaboration amongst the deans, very important initiatives bearing on some of our EDII goals and other academic goals in terms of the kinds of education we're wishing to offer our students. So I think what is happening is in many ways exactly what I would have wanted to happen, which is that collaboration has been taken up, or the spirit of collaboration has been taken up in different parts of the university. And I regard that as extremely positive. For example, even on issues such as the climate of our workplace, which was a key question identified in the report on the conversation. There I've had all kinds of offers and indications of collaborative opportunities from members of the professional and management group and from human resources, both centrally and out in the faculties. So in other words, I'm seeing collaboration beginning, and I think people have taken very seriously that message. I do think, though, that there are a couple of actions that have to be taken to truly move collaboration at Queen's to a high art, to use the language of that comment back in November. You know, I think we have to make sure that the circumstances are supportive of collaboration. There's no shortage of initiative and creativity in this institution, and there's no shortage of goodwill. What we need to be attentive to is to address some of the disincentives to collaboration, or to maximize some of the incentives that might be there for it. And here I'm thinking, I speak in several places in the report on the conversation about our budget model, which, like all budget models, is neither good nor bad. It's only to be judged by the service it does our work as an academic community. And there are ways in which it has been extremely positive, and there are ways in which it offers some disincentives to collaboration. So we're just beginning. The university budgeting process is in full swing, and we just recently on the Provost Advisory Committee on Budget spoke about potential changes that need to be made to the budget model in the future. So things like that. Any kinds of other administrative obstacles to collaboration, those I think we have to attend to as a matter of urgency so that we can unleash the collaborative spirit in the university. I know when I said that, I was also thinking about our capacity to collaborate outside of the boundaries of our own institution, and I began to see some positive signs of that too. There, of course, the challenges are not necessarily more complex, but they often involve elements over which we have less control. But that is, I think, the key point about collaboration. So, to what extent have the policy facilitators been put in place to help us raise collaboration? I think we're getting there. I think with some of them, the process is a longer one. I think the budget model one is a longer discussion. But there are other things that are not quite so long-term, and they need to be given our attention just as much as the longer-term ones. I hope that answers the question. I still believe what I said then is critically important to our success.
Patrick, you did mention the budget. Another question had come in just to ask if you anticipate changes in the budget and budget drivers to fulfill future strategic framework and additional collaboration. Did you want to add anything more on that?
Well, that is really the precise question. I think what I would say, because it's very fresh in my mind, there having been an excellent discussion about this issue at the Advisory Committee on Budget last week. I think, there are some drivers that represent a particular challenge to collaboration. But I would say that the mood on the Provost Advisory Committee on Budget was to take a holistic approach to the budget model. So while you might identify problems with one or two particular components, I think everyone understands that it's in the nature of our budget model that it's a whole. And if you tinker with one element, it will have consequences elsewhere, both in the model and elsewhere in the university. So in approaching the budget model to make some changes, I think we need, of course, to be strategic, but we especially need to be mindful of not provoking some unwanted changes or causing unwanted damage as we go about this. So I'm very much in support of PACV's approach to this as a kind of holistic question. The point has often been made in recent discussions that our budget model was the product of a particular time in our institution's evolution and a particular response to circumstances which have altered somewhat. One can think there, most obviously of the funding formula through which we receive money from the provincial government. So because that is now different, we do need to think differently about the model we use for distributing those resources. That's the approach to take. It was a model which served our needs at a particular time, And we now need to just confirm that whatever budget model we wish to have in place is properly oriented to serving our strategic goals and ambitions.
We've had another question. What is your perspective on the correct balance between graduate research and undergraduate teaching?
Yeah, this is a critical question for our university. I think, there's a broad spectrum of opinion in the extended Queen's family. I think amongst some alumni, there's the view that it has historically been an institution devoted to outstanding undergraduate education, and that is the heart of the mission. On the other hand, when I came here in 2005 to be Vice Principal Academic, we had already, a long time before that, made a commitment to become a research-intensive university. So, to use the famous idiom there, I mean, the horse is out of the gate on our desire to be a research-intensive institution. We are committed to that. We are a member of the U15, and our future and our standing depends on our standing within that group and within the global network of research universities. So I think this question is a very, very fundamental one. I think when I approach this question, I think the mistake is to see it as a binary opposition of some sort. In other words, to posit undergraduate education as our history and historical vocation, and research as a recent preoccupation, which, and this is the view that some people take on this question, are antagonistic goals. I don't think they are. This is an institution devoted to a human and intellectual enterprise. And that enterprise has two dimensions. It has to do with the pursuit of knowledge and the discovery of knowledge and creation. And it also has to do with the dissemination of knowledge. And the dissemination of knowledge occurs through many avenues, one of which is, of course, through publication, but it also occurs through teaching. In a research-intensive institution, researchers are teachers who spread not only the knowledge they have gained, but also the methods by which that knowledge has been acquired. So I think, I'm taking a long time, I apologize, to get to the question of the perfect balance, but I'm just trying to frame it philosophically. I don't accept that these two things pull in opposite directions. I recently attended a series of events celebrating undergraduate student research projects at which the students made presentations on their projects. They were supported by their faculty members, and this was very exciting work. These were undergraduate students engaged in exactly the same enterprise as graduate students engaged in research, and in a different way, in a different place on the scale, the same enterprise that faculty members are engaged in. It's the application of the mind and curiosity to problems and challenges and to a body of knowledge or to some sort of problem that needs solving. So there's a continuity of activity. And I think what's to be sought is not so much a balance as a more fruitful kind of integration. Undergrads thrive when they're stimulated in the same way that graduate students do, in the same way I am delighted when I'm challenged with intellectual ideas or with some insights I didn't know. I think that is the way to think about it. Now, in practical terms, I think for our institution to be stronger as a research-intensive institution, we probably do need to grow our graduate student numbers, which is by no means easy to do under the current funding arrangement. But nevertheless, I think that is a goal we should set for ourselves. But I don't think that pulls against either our commitment to undergraduate education or necessarily against the desirability of maintaining healthy undergrad enrollments. I wrote in the report on the conversation that it's important to think of undergrads as potential grad students, and those grad students as potential contributors to the research enterprise as faculty members and colleagues and so on. And so I think it's a much more profitable approach to think about how we make research the operation, the activity that cascades through this institution and that impacts people at every level, without assuming that there are hard and fast, almost kind of cognitive barriers between what can occur in one constituency in the university versus what can occur in another. It's a long answer to a question which was put with admirable clarity, but I think that's the best I can do on it. The actual balance is a practical issue we have to address with our funders, and recruiting more grad students is connected to the capacity of the university or PIs to support those grad students. And so there's a host of complicated issues that bear on this. I think being clear, though, on our commitment to being a research institution is the place to begin.
Patrick, we have a question from Dr. Anita Jack Davies in the Faculties of Arts and Science. She's asking you to speak to EDII at Queen's in light of what we're seeing in the US with the Capitol riots. How do we engage students in classroom discussions about race and racism with instructors who may not feel comfortable doing so? This is a question that some instructors are grappling with, and it leads to larger discussions on diversifying the curriculum at Queen's.
Yeah, thanks, Anita. Excellent questions. I think this gets to a bigger question, which has to do with the extent to which faculty members, instructors, but not just members of faculty, I think members of staff, people in leadership positions in the university, the obligation that is increasingly, I should say, being felt to be helpful to our students as they deal with some of the challenging issues, to be able to offer guidance to students, to use the teaching moment, the learning moment, to help guide our students in their knowledge of complex social issues, and undoubtedly issues of racism and social inclusion and socioeconomic disparity, and all of these things are critically important to the generation of students we're currently educating in the university. And it's really important that we not fail in our responsibility to support those students into coming to a good understanding of and knowledge of these issues and their complexity, and to make students effective agents for positive social change, while of course being agents for positive social change ourselves. I know that many faculty members feel themselves, some feel very well equipped to provide this support, others feel less well equipped, and I think the university does need to think about ways in which we foster the capacity for the professoriate to provide this platform to students in that dimension of their learning. So, you know, in the same way that we, you know, equity, diversity, and inclusion training is important for any people with positions of leadership in the institution, I think there's a bigger responsibility for people with the futures of young people in their hands to be equipped to support those young people as they interrogate and try to come to understand some of the really extraordinary issues that are going on around them. We live in amazing times. So you mentioned the storming of the Capitol. In what is to be seen in the US now is, you know, a massive challenge to the assumptions of stability across the democratic world, and that it is underpinned with racism is hugely distressing. And I think I really don't have a simplistic answer for you, Anita, on this, other than to say that we all share this responsibility. You have a particular role in the Faculty of Arts and Science to build the capacity to address these issues and to ensure that in that faculty good work is being done to address EDII questions and questions of racism. But every member of the faculty has a similar responsibility, but differently expressed, and I have responsibilities there too. It is, how shall I put this? This is a moment of massive potential impact, not only in our country, but more broadly across the world. And I do think, picking up on the theme of the report on the conversation, we have to have global impact as an institution, and that begins with being effective in the way in which we articulate and educate for progressive social justice.
Also related to EDII, we have it's quite a long question that's come in, so I'll just do my best to summarize it. The Office of the Deputy Provost over the last few years has made a large steps to formalize employee resource groups as one strategy for increasing visibility of minority groups on campus and to attract and retain faculty and staff. Now, faculty have a 40-40-20 model where they have 20% of their work time dedicated to community service, under which working on these committee groups can fall, but staff are largely sitting on these committees during their own personal time. So do you anticipate stronger policies and guidelines for staff to be able to access these groups on paid time for the purpose of organizing these employee resource groups where they can give back to the community and which also provides them with professional skill development?
I do. I mean, I think the ethical principle which is implied in that question is a very sound one. Ours is an organization like any other in which individuals are paid to do work. Universities are slightly different in that it's part of the ethos of them to assume that the relationship between labor and compensation isn't a kind of one-for-one relationship in the way it might be in other workplaces. But that is a perspective that very much emanates from the academy itself. The question is excellent in that it focuses on staff members whose job descriptions may not and whose compensation may not envisage their involvement in these kinds of operations. So I do think that we do need to look at what this means. I mean, it's very important for, let's say, these kinds of groups to meet and to include a broad spectrum of representation. But we do need to also acknowledge that not everybody is either given the latitude in their job description or compensated in a way that makes it fair for the university to ask that of them. There's a very interesting discussion at the moment going on, and I applaud the MSU for the work they've done on this. The AMS, I mean to say, because the AMS has looked at the whole question of how we compensate or should compensate students for work they do for the university along these lines. For the most part, students do enjoy being part of university governance, but sometimes work on these kinds of big social issues is a challenge and very time-consuming. And the AMS is right to see that some of this work is deserving of compensation and that there needs to be some kind of a scale for recognizing it. So yes, I accept the premise of the question, and I do believe that we must develop the kinds of policy guidelines that recognize the situation for people who are otherwise whose employment relationship with the university doesn't otherwise envisage that kind of involvement. It's an odd thing because universities are both organizations like any other, but it is part of their ethos to believe they are and must be more than ordinary organizations. That the very work that they do means they must be striving always to be fair, just, and equitable places in a way that is a model to society outside. So historically, that dimension of university life has been, in some sense, taken for granted, or the participation of members of the community in that has been taken for granted. And I think now we live at a time when the challenges are significant. They require time, energy, and expertise to address, and it can't be taken for granted any longer.
Just going back to the research question a little again, Rob Noble in physics has said, one of the goals mentioned in the report on the conversation is a deepened and deliberate integration of research into the undergraduate curriculum. This is something we've been working on in our department as well. However, it is hard to scale to include a large portion of our undergraduate population in research. Are there examples of this at other institutions?
Thanks, Rob, for an excellent question. You know, it's a very fair question, because it's easy to talk about this kind of thing in a context in which resources are scarce. A PI's grant money can only go so far. And there is also the question of scale, you know, how many undergrad students can be involved in a particular research project. I think, yes, there are some institutions that have, I think, been very successful at advancing the integration of research into the undergrad curriculum. I think where they've been successful, it's either in institutions that have exceptional resources, or in institutions where a different and kind of creative model is hatched for what an undergrad what the involvement of undergrads in research might look like. So, I mean, here, if I go back to the fabulous undergrad presentations I was witness to not so long ago, there the model, of course, is very much like the model of graduate supervision, in that the faculty members had really made an extraordinary effort to support these students, and I recognize that is a very significant call on the resources of individual faculty members, as it is if you're going to offset those challenges, it's a call on resources otherwise. I think there are other directions in undergraduate learning that are very exciting at the moment that I think can be exploited in the cause of increasing undergrad involvement in research. And I'm thinking of, you know, collaborative and self-directed learning, you know, I mean, all this kind of thing, which has become, you know, over the last 10 years, the sort of sine qua non of good pedagogy. One side of this, of course, is work integrated learning and so on. The whole notion of experience as an enriching component of undergrad learning. Well, similarly, self-directed, curiosity-driven projects, often done in collaboration with fellow students or under supervision of some graduate students, is a way I've seen it done. I think, you know, if you look at this from the point of view of outcomes rather than from the point of view of inputs, if the outcome you want is that students should be kind of infused with a hunger for discovery and curiosity about their field of study that would drive them to pursue projects on their own. If that's the outcome, that's really good. However you get to it, I suspect there are a number of ways of getting to that outcome, and that's, I think, what I'm pointing at with the possibility of self-directed and group learning being put to that purpose. Because, I mean, it is one of the fortunate benefits of self-directed and group learning amongst undergraduates is that it makes a different call on resources. It's nothing is ever cheap, but it makes a different call on resources, which might be partly the answer to growing the numbers and growing the intensity of student engagement in research. It's also a question of how you suffuse the spirit of research through the curriculum. And I think, one version of that is that students do projects that look like graduate student projects. But another is that in courses that may be sort of like hybrid courses may look a little more like conventional undergrad courses, but they might have components of discovery and self-directed work. Rob, thanks very much. An excellent question. And I think as we begin to develop the strategic framework, there will be a number of working groups, one of which will have to, obviously there'll be one working on the whole research conundrum here, but there will also be a need for groups to work on enhancements to and enrichment of the student learning experience, the undergrad student learning experience. And that will be a forum in which we can explore some of these ideas and think about what kind of investments might help move the cause along in that regard.
We have quite a number of questions coming in today, and we will try to get to them all. I know, Patrick, you have a few other things too that you would like to speak about. But I do have a question that is asking, do you foresee an alignment of research and teaching priorities with global goals, as an example, the SDGs, that will resonate both within and beyond our local and national communities?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I do. I think, before I go any further, I think a point that has to be made about the SDGs is if you take all 17 of them, they cover pretty well the whole of human activity and all the issues we might want to care about. So in saying we're going to orient ourselves to something like the SDGs at the research and the teaching level doesn't necessarily mean we're going to narrow ourselves down to being just about climate change, say. But I do think if we are to be successful, if we are to elevate ourselves, as I hope we will, we do need to commit ourselves to some kind of big global goals of the sort represented by the SDGs. And then not just do that by declarations. In an institution like this, if there was a whole lot of extra money came in, you could have a big SDG incentive fund, and that would stimulate people to do some work or to extend their own work in that direction. We're not likely to have that. If it matters to us to have a global impact, we have to organize ourselves with that in mind. And this gets then to the point of the question. And I think it's not enough to just say, a good number of our researchers work on issues related to the SDGs, and here's how we could package them up. We already know from the work we did for the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, there's a huge amount of work going on this campus that is oriented towards the SDGs. And I think we need, now we've identified it, to make sure we understand the full extent of it. And then we need to be deliberate about, okay, how could that orientation be better? How could researchers working on this particular issue be better supported by the university? One of the ways in which that could be done, of course, would be through bringing together researchers and instructors and students with an interest in the same areas. And I also think there's a dimension of this that includes curriculum reform. I know already that John Pierce has been looking at ways in which you can tag courses so that we identify them as being connected to particular kinds of, let's say, to the SDGs. I think that's very important. I think if we want to be effective, if we want to have a global impact, if we want to be something other than a significant national institution. We need to be quite deliberate and resolute about orienting ourselves to those goals. Now, I don't want anyone to assume that means we become just the sum of our SDG orientations. Not at all, because as I say, those goals embrace a huge spectrum of significant global issues on which we can have an impact. There are universities, and I was recently on a call with a university in Sweden that has in fact very deliberately and very explicitly declared itself committed to, I forget whether it's two or three of the SDGs, and they organize themselves around that as a primary goal and commitment. But not all institutions, especially an institution like ours, which has a history of some breadth, would necessarily want to go down such a narrow route. But yeah, I do for sure see an alignment of undergrad with grad, with research orientations towards those kinds of goals.
Patrick, another question. The conversation states that Queen's failure to gain traction on EDII is the most significant factor in negative perceptions of the university. Furthermore, we know that these negative perceptions translate into recruiting problems at faculty, staff, and student levels. So that means that other factors such as academic reputation, employment opportunities following graduation, opportunities to engage in innovative and publishable research, relevant and interesting programs, etc., are comparatively unimportant. So what evidence do you have for that belief?
I don't think that's the correct inference from what I say there. The point of that observation is about both reputation and operations. So let me unpack the statement a bit. So we all know that there is a perception of this institution that colors the way in which we are regarded, not only in the higher education world in our country, but also by prospective recruits. So I know when I announced that I would be coming back to Queen's, a very much admired BIPOC colleague of mine at my former institution said to me, "Why would you go there?" I wouldn't go there, he said, no matter what the incentives. And we've all had experiences, I mean, that's an extreme example of this, but we do have trouble on occasions attracting scholars here because of the reputation. This as distinct necessarily from what the reality here is what it might be or what it might become. We know we have this with students. We know that students, BIPOC students, struggle, those who wish to come here, do so against often very powerful advice from their peers, from family members and so on, because of the reputation. So there is the evidence of our problem getting in the way of our success, because implicitly, if we're not attracting the best faculty members here, if we're not attracting the best students here, if we cannot diversify our student body sufficiently, our ability to achieve what we want to achieve is going to be hampered. So it's in that way that I think it is a very significant obstacle to us. It's not the only obstacle we face, and this institution has a fine reputation. So the work in another way, the quality of the work that gets done here, you know, Nobel Prizes, extremely high quality undergrads leave the university every year. And in that respect, the reputation for quality is out there. But so too is that much less desirable reputation for elitism and white privilege. And we do have to rid ourselves of that. We have to rid ourselves of it by attending to its manifestations in our institution. And you might argue we have to work twice as hard as anybody else on this, because the reputation for those things is deeply entrenched outside of the university. So I'm not saying that all the good work that's done in this place is for naught because of that. We obviously have to continue to be the top class research and teaching institutions we've always aspired to be. But we've had trouble shaking off the albatross of this reputation for being a place of privilege. And why would we want that to continue? And I don't see that struggling against that reputation, we will be able to really achieve what I think is the terribly exciting elevation of standing for Queen's University, because of all those good things that were enumerated in the question.
Patrick, going back to collaboration and budget, David Yoakum from Engineering and Applied Science has a question. Can you provide us with your thoughts around centralized services? Thinking of collaborations amongst some of the services you mentioned, some of which also exist in the units, do you see areas where natural collaboration can occur, or perhaps areas that your preference would be that it be offered primarily as a central service?
Well, thanks, David. A great question, and a question also much discussed recently in the budget meetings. It's a really good question. I think, let me begin here. So ours is a decentralized institution. It has been for a very long time. And it naturally inclines to greater and greater degrees of decentralization. And this is one comment I made about the budget model in the report on the conversation, in that it's one of the things that has contributed to a deepening of that decentralized operation. All of which is to say, I think the manifestations of decentralization, some of them such as, the emergence of units within departments and faculties which echo, if they don't replicate, the services that central departments exist to provide. That kind of thing, it tends to occur less through planning and more through kind of ad hoc decision making. So, I mean, it's obvious, right? A faculty will build its capacity in a certain area if it has the resources to do that. If you're in a faculty that actually is not thriving under the new budget model, there are limits to, let's say, your capacity to build your own advancement unit within the faculty or department. Similarly with teaching and learning, I think there are numerous excellent groups across the university that work on teaching and learning questions in service to particular faculty goals. And then there is also the Center for Teaching and Learning. And you tend not to find the proliferation of these kinds of capacities separately from the unequal distribution of resources. And the distressing consequence of that is that the university may be less and less like a level playing field depending on which department or faculty you're in. So I guess what I'm saying there, David, is that I think sometimes the proliferation of decentralized capacities is either sort of accidental or ad hoc, And then you can find yourself in a situation in which it's very difficult to introduce some intentionality to the way in which, let's say, the university wants to manage certain HR issues, or the way we want to manage, well, I'll go back to advancement. And yet, some degree of intentionality is really important there if we're to avoid two things. One is redundancy of function. The other is the waste of money, because our obligation in an institution like this is to make sure that as much of the available resource pool as possible goes to the central academic mission of it. So that's why we do need to look critically at this issue of proliferating units. There is, universities have sometimes pressed the stop button on these kinds of things and taken a really close look at how a university discharges its mission, what the administrative functions are, and how they're shared out. And I think it's really important for universities, and our university is no exception, to pause and to look at that distribution and to say, look, if it's vitally important to this faculty that there be a unique capacity to do X, Y, Z in that capacity, then that's fine. But where we can, it seems to me desirable that we would want to provide some services centrally where that can be done effectively, but also less expensively. So I think, on the list of challenges we have in an institution, I would put that quite high, because we are today the inheritors of a very long process of reflex decentralization. And we might be able to alter that with some modifications to the budget model, which most certainly drives that. But I think it's in our interests to pause and look at those things in a way that critically evaluates the way we're deploying our resources with an eye to the good of the whole institution. Thanks for the question, though, David. Very good question.
I don't want to miss this one. We have a question from Jade, who says they will be an incoming freshman next year from the US. How will you be, and Jade asks, how will you be incorporating the student body into the development of the new strategic direction?
Well, thanks, Jade. Great question. So all of these town hall meetings are open to, as I said, to everybody, and students are most welcome. Similarly, I'm meeting with the AMS Council in I think, let me see, I've even got the date here, AMS Assembly, February the 4th. But there are all kinds of opportunities for students to participate in these discussions, and I hope students will not hesitate to do so. People can contact me directly once we launch the working groups on some of the strategic goals. There will obviously be student representation on those, but also there'll be opportunities for students to have input into the work of those groups. I point out there is also student representation on the Board of Trustees, which is important because, as I say, the board at Queen's essentially owns the strategy and must approve it. So there is an opportunity at that level for student input. But for any student who is engaged with the institution and who believes they have something that an insight that would be helpful to the laying out of that goal, I would encourage them to get in touch with me directly. I've met with countless students one-on-one to talk about their experiences here and things that are important to them. I've met with groups of students, and I've also met with student representatives through whom that kind of input can be fed. I have to say, strategic planning processes can be paralyzing things for universities, because at one level, you could devote 3 years to it and come out with a product that may necessarily be all that better than something that comes out after 1 year. So I think we need to pursue this particular stage with some resolve and energy, and anybody who's keen to make a contribution should get in and make their views known without delay. So thanks for the question, Jade. Great to have you coming.
Okay, we have a question from Dinah Jansen from CFRC. She's asked, I'd like to hear more on the university's engagement with the community and ways in which some of the university's scholarly and human resources can be brought to bear on issues of cultural and environmental sustainability locally, as your report indicates, but also social reform and renewal. What might this multi-pronged engagement look like in practice?
Hi, Dinah. Thanks. Great question. I think I'll make a point which I think you underlined there in the question, which is that, you know, when one talks about having a great global purpose and when one talks about the Sustainable Development Goals, the habit of mind is to assume that that's about somewhere else, that poverty is somewhere else, or the oppression of women is somewhere else, or massive socioeconomic disparities are problems elsewhere in the world. They're not, of course. So I think the important point to be made, you know, in beginning to think about this orientation to the world is that you can be fully oriented to the problems of the world by being fully engaged with your own backyard. And I think that is really important. It's a temptation for institutions, particularly ones with a reputation for distinction, to think that they are defined by their impact elsewhere on the highest possible scale. But no, you know, we will and must be measured by our impact on our local community as much as by our impact on the broader planetary community. So beginning with that insight, I think, you know, there are lots of ways, and we've done the we have in fact just recently a very effective assessment of the contribution which Queen's makes to our community economically and socially. I think we're only beginning to understand, frankly, the social. I think we have large numbers of students who do important work in the community, working for social organizations or community or charitable organizations. I was in fact quite amazed when last year I undertook a tour of some of those organizations to learn just how many of our students are active in those organizations. And I'd say the same is true for staff and faculty members. Members of the Queen's family are very engaged with the community they live in and within which we work. But we don't, as an institution, name that activity as fundamentally important. And I do think that is important. I think we have to pay attention to that kind of work and reward it. To see it as just as important as, you know, a massive contribution to the field of knowledge on, you know, a particular subject. In other words, we have to broaden our criteria for excellence and achievement so that we recognize that as an institution and as individuals working in an institution, we have an obligation and responsibility to work for the betterment of the community that sustains us. Now, so I think that is a challenge we can rise to. We can build better relationships between the university and social agencies. We can, as we have done, join with St. Lawrence College and Kingston Economic Development to spearhead the whole idea of prosperity and good health and well-being in our community. That is more important. But for me, the perhaps most exciting dimension of this, once you get beyond saying this shouldn't be just volunteer work, this is important substantive work related to the mission of the university. It's important to think about what community engaged core university activities would look like. Community engaged research, for example, is a very well documented and sophisticated area of university activity, and not only in this country, but more broadly. There's a system of ethics which has to obtain if you're going to engage in research in partnership with community organizations. There are ethical obligations that bear on what problems you tackle. The community is not there to be the laboratory of academics. The community has a life of its own, and we share in the importance of making sure that that community is as good and as enriching for its members as can be. So community engaged research is research that, yes, advances the pursuit of knowledge in the university, that will yield benefits in terms of published results and so on, yes. But it is also research that is carried out in dialogue with and in partnership with the community of which it's a part. And this gets back to the question I was asked earlier on about partnership as a key thing. Collaboration and partnership, important too in achieving our social goals. And there is also a dimension of teaching in a community context that is important and worth building on. So a Queen's more engaged with its community, I see as deeply committed to that community in the traditionally predictable ways, being attentive to our role in economic development, but going far beyond that to understanding our role and responsibilities in attending to and finding solutions to the social challenges which beset our community. There was a moment at the start of COVID when I remember being a part of a discussion about the role the university might play in addressing the challenges that homeless people faced with the advent of the coronavirus. And I was deeply moved by the speed with which members of the university community immediately saw that we could offer solutions. We had space we could provide. We had all kinds of expertise that could be offered. And I do think of that as a sort of signal moment for me in the year of the conversation, because I saw there a readiness on the part of our university community to accept that obligation for our fellow citizens and to understand that at base, the work that is done in this institution, however arcane and sophisticated it is for the good of people and the planet. And from that follows the inevitability and the critical importance of a close engagement with the immediate community. Thanks, Dana, for the question.
Hey, Patrick, we have a question from Gilles Gerbier, and I apologize if I've said his name wrong. You mentioned in the report the feeling of lack of purpose as an institution. Can you elaborate a bit about your view of a purpose for Queen's, a cause for pride?
Yeah. I often, when I'm talking about this whole issue of purpose, I remember the Charlie Chaplin film, I think it's Modern Times, in which the Chaplin figure is working on an assembly line. He has a role on the assembly line that is very simple. He tightens a bolt with a wrench, and then he tightens a bolt on the next piece of equipment with a wrench, and he keeps doing it with no sense of what that bolt is part of, what it all adds up to, and what this person is contributing to. And I think all organizations, and universities are not immune to this, fall into the habit of taking their mission and their purpose for granted, and then it becomes a kind of a routine thing. And even when the components of that mission are fabulous, well, you know, what could be more wonderful as a part of your mission than the cultivation of the potential of young people, awakening them to the strengths they have within themselves and making them powerful agents for doing positive and constructive things in the world. That's our mission. I'm not suggesting that we aren't, that we lose sight of that mission. I don't think we do. I think you know, most people in the university do understand that that is a noble and fabulous mission, as is the mission of discovery and creativity. But there is a level at which, you know, the cyclical nature of that mission. We graduate students in the spring, we enroll students in the fall. We do this over and over again. It is very difficult to change curriculum in institutions like this, so we, in a sense, are caught up in a kind of repetitive cycle of the ideas that we are transmitting to the students or engaging the students on. I don't want to overstate this. This is, you know, it's a fine institution where people are mindful of that. But the big purpose, are we just an organization that fulfills a social need? Our government needs educational institutions to educate the young, etc. Is it that, or do we want a bigger impact? Do we want to be an institution that is about justice? And if so, do we want to organize our work on health, our work on, let's say, in engineering? Do we want to look at initiatives and discoveries that support global justice? And, you know, in other words, we need, in a world that falls by default into repetition, pattern, and self-perpetuation, I think it's really important for us to hold in front of ourselves a goal that excites us, and that makes us want to not just do again what we did yesterday, but to do it better, and to do it in ways that maximize its impact. And that's essentially what I'm getting at. It's less about the goal than it is about a process of constantly challenging ourselves to do better. I hope that answers the question. I should say, by the way, part of this process that I mapped out at the start does involve writing out our mission, saying what it is. You know, if we think addressing issues of sustainability is something we all care about and which we all will address in our own way. I'm an English prof. There are ways in which the work I do speaks to the goal of sustainability or education for sustainability. I think there are ways in which we can all feed into those goals that could really be very exciting. Now, to write, you know, to identify that in the mission statement will be very important.
So Patrick, right now we're at 5:10. That leaves us 20 minutes left for a conversation today. I don't know if you want to just take some time to look again at how the roadmap of the strategy you see it unfold before us. Did you want to talk at all about articulating the mission, values, vision for the university?
Yeah, Mary Beth, thanks. I hope people would find it useful. So I did play around with what mission and vision and values and goals could look like so there's all hypothetical and provisional. But my point of departure here was to say, okay, I conducted the conversation. I wrote the report on the conversation, and I've spent quite a bit of time since last October when the report came out, essentially trying to validate it. I've been asking people, well, does this resonate with you? And if so, how, in what way, and so on. And I would say the message I've had very strongly is that it does. So now I'm thinking, okay, if I were wanting to come up with a mission statement or a vision statement, I mean, these are sort of the basic building blocks of a strategic framework, what might they look like? So here, I'll give you an example. So here's the mission statement. I don't know if everyone can see that. All right, Keith, it's visible, I believe. Thanks. So here is just a run at a mission statement that I thought would speak to the issues raised in the report on the conversation, but it doesn't necessarily capture the desirable weighting of these things. It doesn't, it perhaps doesn't articulate in a bold enough way the kind of goals we might have. But let me just walk you through it, and you'll see what I've been trying to do. And in a way, I'm just hoping that in these forthcoming town halls, I'll be able to advance this discussion a little more, hearing from all of you about what the components of a mission statement ought to be, whether this is nonsense and whether there are other things you'd like to see in it. But this is what I inferred from the conversation. Queen's University is a scholarly community that aspires to elevate the prospects of all people. That's the grand goal, and the planet. And then how do we do it? By the pursuit and dissemination of knowledge. And that is obviously the research and teaching side there. Recapitulated in the following sentence then through research and teaching. And then, this might strike you as odd, and also directly in its operations as a leading and influential Canadian institution, the university to realize this goal of a particular kind of society. What I was trying to get at there in that phrase about directly in its operations is that business of living it. If we care about justice and global collaboration, if we care about the use of knowledge for the betterment of all, that it's not enough to just say those things as a mission statement. We have to do it. If we care about sustainability, we have to do certain things, make certain choices about our procurement, about our energy source, and so on. So it's that component that I was getting at there. And if Keith, if you could go back to that to the mission statement. There you go. And the end of that statement, there is an attempt to capture what the whole operation is oriented to do, to realize the goal of an informed, wise, creative, healthy, and equitable society, responsive to and responsible for the environment which sustains it. All this looks wordy, I'm sure, but I hope you can see that I'm just, with these sentences, trying to register the key components that all of you stressed to me were important during the process of the conversation. So then if we can go on to the vision, which is the next slide, Keith, thanks. So you know how the mission-vision dichotomy, the mission is what we exist to do, the vision is how we see ourselves, how we aspire to, what we achieve to, what we aspire to be. And so this might also not light your fire, but building on its history as a major contributor to human attainment, good governance, and prosperity in Canada. And here I'm talking about our fundamental and important role in the history of the development of Canada as a country. That's not to be gainsaid. We did that. Part of our standing nationally depends on that. And so although in the report on the conversation I talk about the different institution we have to become, we don't become a different institution by rejecting our past. We become a different institution by making new decisions. So we build on that, but to be recognized as an influential, active, and engaged global partner in education and research for sustainable societal impact. Yeah, lacks punch and needs to be a little more pointed than that. And also there, I would want to register in both the mission and vision what that new turn in our history represents. And this is where the EDII issue comes in, and you'll see I've got that in the values section in the document I've been drafting. So I don't think that's there as a vision quite yet. But okay, so Keith, if we could move on then, I probably want to go to the values slide next. If we have that one. These are ways of getting there. I think here we go, the next one. So this is important, before you get into how we're going to do this stuff, what our specific initiatives in research should be, what our specific approach to internationalization should be. There are those two components we have to get right, which is the mission and vision. And then we have to also reiterate what we stand for in terms of values. And that was critically important in the conversation. That's what I set out to ask about, and it's what I heard back from you all with considerable volume. So here's a stab at what a kind of a summary of values might look like. We live our vision daily, and this gets to that point I made in the mission, that it's not enough to be about something. We have to exemplify it. And then here we get to the values that should operate in every corner of the institution. Collegiality, generosity, trust, and respect animate our interactions. Equity, diversity, inclusion, and indigenization, as well as the sense of responsibility for the planet and all the life it sustains. These imperatives frame the mission and vision of Queen's University. So if you're thinking about the relationship of these pieces, this is the really fundamental statement. And it is important to write this stuff down. Say, this is what we represent. Let's hold ourselves to this. From this come those other things. It's interesting. It gets back to the question I was asked earlier on about the relationship of our EDII challenge to our standing and the quality of our work. So this is critically important. And this is the thing, as I say here, that frames the mission and vision. And those essentially take their cue from these. And then when I was thinking about, okay, well, so what does a strategic framework based on the conversation look like? There are obviously strategies that you need in order to get there, right? So how do you discharge that mission? How do you realize that vision, assuming you characterize it in some way that is close in some way to what I've put up here? And here I identified a number of strategic goals, and these will not surprise you coming out of the conversation. So Keith, if you could go to the strategic goal 1. Right, so how these things all add up, right? So we have five strategic goals here enumerated. I envisage that when we are in that period, sort of from March moving into the summer, and we've got working groups looking at all of these things, individual initiatives will be identified which will be particularly potent for their capacity to help us realize that vision and discharge that mission. So first one, exemplary, groundbreaking research, whether curiosity-driven, applied, or community-based. You know, since I published the report on the conversation, people have asked me, does that mean that, you know, the work we do driven by curiosity is somehow no longer relevant? Well, no, not at all. You know, a university is a spectrum of activities. There is some research that is more obviously amenable to use and application. On the other hand, outstanding research that eventually leads to great applications emerges from curiosity. And I've spoken already about community-based research. So there is obviously, you know, a critically important component of the way in which we want to lay out our plans for the future. Now, then secondly, outstanding quality and innovation in its educational programs at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. I mean, here we're talking about our critical function with regard to students, whether they're undergrads or grads, and the importance of making sure that the experience they have is not just the best it can be, but extremely exciting and in line with the kinds of broader goals that we have for our institution, because it is through students that we will have our greatest impact. So obviously, these are like motherhood kind of issues, you know. Well, yeah, of course we're going to have research, and yeah, of course we've got to pay attention to the student experience. These are here because they're critical components of what we do, but how we think about strategy in these two areas has to be dictated by that bigger goal, that bigger aspiration we make for the university. So what we want to do with those educational programs will be shaped by what we want to decide, say, with regard to the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is to the question I was asked too about alignment. Why don't we go on to three, Keith, thanks. And this is the key strategic component, which is that issue of pulling it all together. So in the context of an overall alignment with the SDGs, the interdependence of the research and teaching missions, especially through the greater integration of research in the undergrad experience. My colleague from physics earlier on mentioned that, you know, for quite a long time, his department has been working to deepen that research component in the undergrad experience, and they're obviously challenged doing that. So here it is again, but as an institution-wide commitment, but linked to the big global purpose and colored and shaped by that global purpose. So here I'm trying, as I say, to pick up what was asked for in the conversation, but to try and frame it in a way that brings it all together. Okay, let's go to 4. And this is internationalization, which I think many of you have heard me speak about often. There is no future for an institution that has our aspirations outside of an internationalized future. We have to not just see internationalization as a thing that sort of happens on the side or that's just about student mobility. But what we have to do is see our purpose as global, which doesn't, going back to Deane's question, doesn't preclude the local. We have to see ourselves as operating in a global context, and that's the importance of this. And we've already got, because we've been partnering with the International Association of Universities, we've already got a group working under Sandra Donata's leadership on thinking through our approach to internationalization. So then if I could go to the last one of these 5, this picks up on Dinah's question about connecting the university locally. through deliberate, strategic, respectful, and mutually beneficial engagement with communities outside of the university. And it's important to see that that is an encompassing kind of goal, because that includes everything from collaborations with community agencies to partnerships with economic development organizations and so on. So now we could maybe go to the process slide, and it's with that I can end today. So you can skip through the questions, Keith. All right, so I'll just take you back to the slide with which we began. So this is how I see things playing out, and I hope you'll all find ways to involve yourselves in the discussion, either at the town halls or in discussion with working groups, or directly in communication with me. These mission and vision statements I just shared with you are in a sense sort of markers. These are the kinds of statements we need. These are not actually the statements that I expect we will end up with, but I think broadly our goal needs to be to have ways of characterizing our goals and our aspirations and our values that are responsive to what I think the conversation revealed about our university community, that are positive, uplifting, engaging, and really make us all excited about the future of our institution and the impact it's going to have. I'll leave you with this thought. The report on the conversation is this sort of diagnosis. This phase we're into here is really thinking about steps that need to be taken to remedy the challenges found in the diagnosis, and to, I suppose, yield a very healthy and positive prognosis for our institutional future. So I think I should, in the interest of time, leave it there, unless, Mary Beth, there is a question that's emerged in the chat that's fundamental and critical for me to answer before I leave off, and thank people for coming.
There's a lot of good questions that we wouldn't be able to get to today, Patrick, but I think we should wrap up.
Well, I think what we could do is we will have a record of all those questions, thanks, and I hope if I haven't gotten to your question today, you'll avail yourself of an opportunity to put it again, either at another town hall or get in touch with me directly. Would really be grateful for everyone's continuing involvement and engagement in this process. I'm excited about this stage of things. I mean, I think how wonderful it would be for us by the time we get to the end of this year to have a framework in place which helps us make decisions, that inspires us, and that sends a message to the academy and to the world more broadly that this institution will have in the future at least, and perhaps more, of a significant impact than we have had in the past. So thanks very much, everyone. Really grateful to you all for coming and for your questions, which were all very much in the spirit I was hoping for. Thanks. Bye.